Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt a memory trying to surface that simply wasn't there? A phantom recollection dancing at the edge of consciousness, like a word perched at the tip of your tongue but refusing to materialize? That's how it began for me, with the sensation of forgetting something I had never known. My name is Daniel Pierce, and I've spent the last decade documenting abandoned places for my somewhat successful blog, Forgotten Corners. The irony of that title would only become apparent much later. I specialized in remote locations with troubled histories, the places that whispered rather than shouted their secrets. But nothing prepared me for what awaited at Black Rock Lighthouse. The invitation arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, an actual paper letter, withered at the edges as if it had traveled much farther than the postal service could account for. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph of a limestone lighthouse perched precariously on a jutting promontory, waves crashing dramatically against the rocks below. The back bore only coordinates and 5 handwritten words: "The bell awaits your return." I had never been to this lighthouse. Or at least, I didn't think I had. 3 days later, I stood at the base of a narrow path winding up the jagged coastline, my equipment bag heavy on my shoulder. The air tasted of salt and something metallic, like blood or old pennies, that coated the back of my throat. April on the northern coast was unforgiving. Wind whipped my jacket around my body as dark clouds gathered overhead. The lighthouse stood stark white against the gathering storm, somehow both inviting and forbidding. Just a few days of documentation, I muttered to myself, adjusting my pack. Another entry for the blog. Nothing extraordinary. But even as I spoke the words, something fluttered in my chest, a recognition that didn't belong. The path beneath my feet felt strangely familiar despite my certainty that I had never walked it before. The lighthouse keeper's cottage sat adjacent to the main tower, its windows dark and vacant. According to my research, the last keeper had abandoned his post in 1977, claiming in his resignation letter that the bell speaks words no man should hear. Since then, the lighthouse had been automated before being decommissioned entirely 15 years ago when newer navigation systems made it obsolete. I fumbled with the rusty key I'd been sent, surprised when it turned smoothly in the lock as if it had been recently oiled. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to reverberate in my bones rather than my ears. The cottage interior was sparse but unexpectedly clean. No dust covered the simple wooden table with a pair of chairs beside it. The small living area opened to a rudimentary kitchen, and a narrow staircase led to what I presumed was a bedroom above. But what caught my attention was the wall facing the sea, covered entirely with intricate charcoal drawings of bizarre creatures that seemed part fish, part human, part something else entirely. They spiraled around a central image of a large bell, its surface inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. My fingers traced one of the drawings, and a shock, like static electricity but colder, ran up my arm. Just old paper and graphite, I reasoned aloud, but my voice sounded hollow in the quiet room. As I unpacked my equipment, I noticed a leather-bound journal on the table that I hadn't seen when I first entered. Its cover was unmarked, the pages within yellowed with age. Opening to a random page, I found handwritten text in what appeared to be multiple languages, some I couldn't identify. Among them, phrases in English jumped out. The bell records. The bell remembers when we forget. Time's circle is not perfect. There are gaps through which we might escape. They rise when the moon is hidden. They sing when the bell is struck. A sudden gust of wind slammed against the windows, making me jump. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall as daylight faded rapidly. I should have been setting up my cameras, preparing to document the lighthouse interior, but instead, I found myself continuing to leaf through the journal, a growing unease settling in my stomach. The final page contained only a single line, written in a shaky hand unlike the neat script that filled the earlier sections. This is my 5th arrival. How many times have you returned, Daniel? My own name, written in ink long since dried. Written years before I had ever heard of this place. A sound rose above the gathering storm, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the floorboards and into my chest. A bell, ringing from somewhere inside the lighthouse tower. But lighthouses don't have bells, they have foghorns. I moved to the window, peering through the rain toward the tower. A light shone from the lantern room at the top, impossibly, since the lighthouse had been decommissioned years ago. The logical part of my mind suggested a restoration project I hadn't discovered in my research, or perhaps squatters who had taken residence. But deeper down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew better. That light wasn't new. It was old, ancient, even, and somehow, impossibly, it was waiting for me. The bell tolled again, its vibration setting my teeth on edge. 3 slow, deliberate rings. Night fell completely as I gathered my flashlight and recorder. Whatever was happening here would make for a far more interesting blog entry than I had anticipated. That's what I told myself as I stepped outside into the rain, the beam of my light cutting weakly through the darkness toward the tower entrance. The massive door to the lighthouse stood ajar, though I could have sworn it had been securely padlocked when I passed it earlier. Inside, spiral stairs wound upward into darkness. The air felt dense, as if the space contained more atmosphere than it should. "Hello?" I called, my voice flat and lifeless in the strange acoustics of the tower. "Is anyone here?" No answer came, but as my light played across the stone walls, I noticed markings similar to those in the journal, symbols and diagrams etched into the very stone, some fresh-looking, others worn with age. Another toll of the bell shook the tower, closer now, and I realized it came from above, not below as I'd first thought. Logic dictated I should leave, call the authorities perhaps, return in daylight. But my feet carried me upward, step by step, as rainwater dripped from my jacket onto the worn stone stairs. With each turn of the staircase, the markings on the walls grew more elaborate and disturbing, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and too many eyes, constellations I didn't recognize, and everywhere, the symbol of the bell. Halfway up, I found the first body, or what remained of one. A desiccated corpse dressed in modern hiking clothes, slumped against the wall as if it had simply sat down to rest and never risen again. The face was mummified, lips pulled back from teeth and a grimace or scream. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling down the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was no longer about blog content or exploration. Something was very wrong here. I needed to leave, to call the police. But even as I turned to descend, the bell tolled again, 4 rings now, and with each resonant note, the light in my flashlight dimmed and strengthened as if in rhythm with the sound. The corpse's finger twitched. No, I told myself. That was impossible. A trick of the stuttering light. I forced myself to look again, training my flashlight directly on the corpse. Its chest rose and fell with a single shallow breath. Then its head turned, desiccated skin cracking with the movement, and its eyes opened, empty sockets that somehow still managed to fix on me with recognition. Its jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before a raspy whisper emerged. "You're earlier this time, Daniel." The cycle accelerates. The bell tolled a fifth time, and the light in my flashlight died completely. In the perfect darkness, I felt cold fingers grasp my wrist. And then I remembered. I had been here before. Darkness swallowed me whole as those desiccated fingers gripped my wrist with impossible strength. My scream caught in my throat, trapped by primal terror. Then, as suddenly as it had grabbed me, the hand released. The flashlight flickered back to life, revealing nothing but an empty stairwell. The corpse had vanished. I scrambled backward, colliding with the curved wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Was I hallucinating? Had exhaustion from the drive combined with the strange atmosphere of this place to produce waking nightmares? Get it together, Daniel, I whispered to myself, the sound of my own name triggering something, a fragment of memory that didn't belong. For a split second, I saw myself standing in this exact spot, but wearing different clothes. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The bell hadn't tolled again. In the relative silence, I became aware of a different sound, voices, barely audible, chanting in some unknown language. They seemed to come from above, where that impossible light still shone from the lantern room. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I continued upward. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if time itself were thickening around me. My watch had stopped at 12:17, but whether that was noon or midnight, I could no longer tell. The storm outside had intensified. I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, the wind howling around the stone structure. 3 more turns around the spiral staircase brought me to a small landing and a metal door. Unlike the weathered stone surrounding it, this door gleamed as if newly forged, intricate engravings covering its surface, the same symbols from the journal on walls, arranged in concentric circles around a central bell motif. The chanting grew louder here, accompanied by a rhythmic tapping that mimicked a heartbeat. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill in the air. Logic and self-preservation urged retreat, but something deeper pulled me forward, a sense that I had left something unfinished behind that door. Something vital. I pressed my palm against the cool metal. The door swung inward silently, revealing a scene that defied comprehension. The lantern room had been transformed. The expected glass walls and lamp mechanism were gone, replaced by a circular chamber with a domed ceiling entirely covered in the strange symbols. In the center hung the bell, massive and dark, forged from some black metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. It hovered unsupported, slowly rotating, its surface rippling as if not entirely solid. Around it stood 7 figures in hooded robes the color of deep ocean, their faces obscured in shadow. They moved in slow, deliberate patterns, maintaining equal distance from each other as they circled the bell. The chanting came from them, though their hoods never moved. The sound seemed to emanate from the air around them rather than from physical throats. None of this made sense. None of this could exist. Yet I stood frozen in the doorway, camera forgotten in my hand, as reality unraveled before me. One of the figures stopped and turned toward me. Though I could see nothing within its hood, I felt its attention like a physical weight. "The observer returns," it said, its voice resonating at a frequency that made my molars ache. The cycle tightens. The others paused their movement, 7 faceless hoods now oriented in my direction. The chanting ceased, leaving a silence so profound it buzzed in my ears. I started, but my voice failed me. I tried again. "I don't understand. What is this place? Who are you?" A sound like distant laughter rippled through the chamber. Not from the figures, but from the bell itself, its surface vibrating with each chilling note. "He asks the same questions," said another figure, its voice distinctly feminine but hollow, as if echoing from the bottom of a well. Always the same beginning. The patterns persist, agreed a third. My head throbbed as disjointed images flashed through my consciousness, myself entering this room before, dozens of times, always with the same expression of disbelief. Myself speaking with these figures, arguing, pleading. Myself standing before the bell as it grew larger, consuming my field of vision. No, I gasped, pressing the heels of my hands against my temples. These aren't my memories. Time is not linear here, said the first figure, taking a step toward me. The bell gathers it, folds it, returns it to its source. You have always been here, Daniel Pierce. You have always been our witness. My legs threatened to buckle beneath me. I gripped the doorframe for support, the metal cold beneath my fingers. Witness to what? As if in response, the 7 figures resumed their positions around the bell and began a new chant, deeper, more resonant, vibrating in my chest cavity. The bell's rotation accelerated, its surface now clearly fluid, like mercury suspended in air. Images formed on its rippling exterior, faces contorted in terror, landscapes both familiar and alien, creatures that defied biological classification. The deep ones rise, intone the figures in unison. The boundary thins. Witness, recorder, remember, the cycle must complete. The bell began to glow from within, a sickly greenish light that cast 7 distinct shadows from the figures, shadows that didn't match their forms. Where human silhouettes should have fallen, I saw twisted, elongated shapes with too many limbs, their edges constantly shifting as if struggling to maintain cohesion in our reality. A name rose unbidden to my lips, ancient and terrible. I clamped my mouth shut before it could escape, instinctively understanding that speaking it would be catastrophic. One of the figures, the female voice, turned toward me again. He remembers faster this time. The erosion of boundaries accelerates. What do you want from me? I demanded, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. What? The words seemed to confuse them. They conferred in hushed tones, their shadows writhing independently on the floor. Finally, the first figure addressed me again. We want nothing from you, Daniel Pierce. You are the anchor, the constant. Without your observation, the ritual cannot stabilize. Without stability, they cannot cross over properly. In answer, the bell tolled once more, not the clear resonant sound from before, but a discordant vibration that shook the very molecules of air. The fluid surface of the bell parted like a curtain, revealing not emptiness within but a window, a view into depths of swirling darkness where massive shapes moved with deliberate purpose. The sight triggered another cascade of memories, standing here before, watching as something reached through that opening. The cold touch of appendages that had never evolved under Earth's sun. The whispers in my mind that followed, lingering for days afterwards. The compulsion that always, inevitably, drew me back to this place when the stars aligned properly. No, I said, stepping backward. I won't be part of this. You already are, said the first figure. In every iteration. The only variable is how you choose to participate. My back hit the wall beside the doorway. Something sharp pressed against my spine, a protrusion from the stone I hadn't noticed before. I shifted sideways, glancing down to see what had jabbed me. It was a knife, ancient, its handle wrapped in discolored leather, its blade inscribed with familiar symbols. Another memory surfaced, my own hand gripping that knife, plunging it into the throat of the hooded figure nearest the bell. The ritual disrupted. The bell's tolling silenced, but only temporarily. The knife had always been there, waiting for this moment of recognition. Had I placed it there myself in a previous cycle? You begin to understand, said the female voice, closer now. She had moved while my attention was on the knife. The choice is always the same. Join us willingly and maintain your identity within the collective, or resist and be consumed individually. My fingers closed around the knife handle. The metal felt warm, alive. There is a third option, I said, memories continuing to surface, memories of rebellion, of temporary victories. I've taken it before. And yet, you always return, she observed, her empty head tilting slightly. The bell calls, and Daniel Pierce answers. The cycle persists. Outside, the storm reached its crescendo. Lightning illuminated the chamber through a small window in the dome, briefly casting everything in stark white relief. In that flash, I saw beneath their hoods, not faces, but swirling voids punctuated by points of light like distant stars. The bell's tolling increased in tempo and volume until it was almost continuous, its surface now a churning maelstrom of images and faces, many of which, I realized with horror, were my own. Different versions of me, from different cycles, different attempts to break free. The knife grew heavier in my hand. I had used it before, I now remembered clearly. I had disrupted the ritual, fled this place, changed my name, hidden halfway across the world. But the bell always found me again. Its call was inevitable, inescapable. Unless a new memory surfaced, or perhaps not a memory at all, but a sudden intuition. The bell absorbed time, folded it, controlled it. But it was vulnerable during the transference, during the moment when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. The 7 figures had resumed their chanting, moving faster now around the bell, their shadows becoming more substantial as their physical forms grew increasingly transparent. The opening within the bell widened, and something began to emerge, a massive, undulating appendage that defied geometric logic. I gripped the knife tighter and stepped forward, not toward the figures, but toward the bell itself. Observer. The first figure's voice held a note of alarm. That path leads only to dissolution. Maybe, I agreed, memories of previous failures giving weight to his warning, but also propelling me forward. Or maybe this time, I break the cycle. The knife felt like an extension of my arm as I raised it, not to strike at the figures, but at the heart of the bell itself. The appendage reaching through recoiled as if sensing my intent. Time seemed to slow as the blade arced toward the rippling surface. And the bell tolled once more, a sound not of metal struck by a clapper, but of reality itself tearing at the seams. The knife contacted the bell's surface with a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, a high, keening wail that seemed to emanate not from the metal but from the fabric of existence itself. The blade didn't penetrate but instead sank into the rippling darkness as if into thick liquid. Reality stuttered. I found myself standing at the base of the lighthouse, equipment bag heavy on my shoulder, the taste of salt and metal fresh on my tongue. Rain had just begun to fall, the first drops heavy against my jacket. Disoriented, I looked up at the white tower looming against storm clouds. Had I blacked out? Dreamed the entire sequence of events? But the knife was still in my hand, its blade now scorched and pitted as if exposed to immense heat. And my memories remained intact, the corpse on the stairs, the robed figures, the bell with its impossible window to somewhere else. Time had rewound, but not completely. Not cleanly. The cycle's damaged, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. By striking the bell during the ritual, I had disrupted its control over temporal flow. Instead of erasing my memories and beginning again, the process had faltered. Wind whipped around me, carrying a distant sound, that same chanting I had heard in the lantern room, fainter now but unmistakable. They were still there, still performing their ritual. The reset hadn't affected them. Rain fell harder as I stood frozen with indecision. Logic dictated I should leave this cursed place immediately, drive as far and as fast as possible. But deeper instincts told me this represented a unique opportunity. The cycle was broken, the pattern disrupted. If there was ever a chance to end this permanently, it would be now, while the ritual was destabilized. The knife seemed to pulse in my grip, its symbols glowing faintly with inner light. Another fragment of memory surfaced, not from this cycle but from many iterations past. The knife was old, far older than the lighthouse. It had been forged specifically to counter the bell's influence, designed by those who opposed the summoning of the Deep Ones. I had found it originally. Where? The memory remained frustratingly incomplete, but I knew the knife was crucial. In every cycle where I discovered it, I came closer to breaking free. My equipment bag contained my camera, extra batteries, notebook, and flashlight. I added the knife, wrapping it in a spare t-shirt, then slung the bag over my shoulder and began the climb toward the lighthouse again. This time, I avoided the keeper's cottage entirely, circling around to the tower entrance. The padlock hung broken, the door ajar just as I had seen it before, or would see it later. Time was becoming difficult to parse. Inside, the spiral staircase stretched upward, but something was different. The symbols etched into the walls were changing, shifting as if alive, rearranging themselves into new patterns as I watched. The boundaries between iterations were thinning, versions of reality bleeding into one another. I began to climb, moving as quietly as possible. Where before I had found a corpse, there was now only a dark stain on the stones. I pressed onward, listening for the bell's toll, but heard only the storm outside and the distant, constant chanting. 3 turns around the spiral brought me to a small window, one I hadn't noticed before. Through it, I could see the keeper's cottage from above, and movement inside caught my attention. A figure that was unmistakably me, another version, was examining the journal I had found earlier. I watched, transfixed, as this other Daniel traced the drawings on the wall, flinching at the same static shock I had experienced. Time isn't just rewinding, I murmured. It's fragmenting. Multiple versions of the same events were occurring simultaneously. The implications were staggering and terrifying. If the ritual continued despite this fracturing, what would emerge from the bell might be even more horrific, unstable in our reality. I had to reach the lantern ring before my other self did, before the ritual progressed too far. I continued climbing, taking the steps 2 at a time now, no longer concerned with stealth. The metal door awaited me on the landing, gleaming and inscribed just as before. But now additional symbols were appearing across its surface, burning themselves into the metal like brands. The door was changing, adapting to the fractured timeline. Beyond it, the chanting had reached a fevered intensity. No longer measured and rhythmic, it had become desperate, frantic. They were trying to stabilize the ritual despite the disruption I had caused. I removed the knife from my bag, its blade now glowing with a blue-white light that cast sharp shadows on the stone walls. The metal felt hot in my hand, but not painfully so, more like holding a living thing, something with its own energy and purpose. With my free hand, I pushed open the door. The scene within was chaos. The 7 robed figures moved erratically around the bell, which no longer rotated smoothly but jerked and shuddered in midair. Its surface roiled violently, images forming and dissolving too quickly to comprehend. The opening within had become unstable, pulsing wider than narrower in irregular intervals. What truly chilled my blood, however, were the additional figures in the room, 3 more versions of myself at different stages of entry. One stood frozen in the doorway as I had initially. Another was moving toward the bell with a knife identical to mine. The third lay crumpled in the corner, blood pooling beneath him, eyes open and vacant. None of them seemed aware of each other, or of me. They existed in their own separate streams of time, visible to me only because of my disrupted place in the sequence. The robed figures, however, saw everything. The one who had first addressed me, their leader, I presumed, stood directly before the bell, arms raised. The fracture worsens, it called out, voice reverberating painfully in my skull. The observer multiplies. Stabilize the anchor point. 2 of the others broke from the circle and moved toward the version of me with the knife. In that moment, I understood what had happened to the third Daniel, the one bleeding out in the corner. They had killed him to prevent him from striking the bell. I had to act immediately. Stepping fully into the room, I raised the knife high. Stop! The leader's command hit me like a physical blow, causing me to stagger. You don't understand what you risk. The bell is the only barrier holding them back. Break it, and they pour through uncontrolled. Doubt flickered through me. Was it lying? The deep ones I had glimpsed through the bell's opening certainly seemed to be trying to enter our world, not escape from it. The bell doesn't hold them back, I called over the mounting cacophony of the storm and chanting. It's a doorway, a passage that you're trying to open. No, came the feminine voice from earlier, her robed form gliding toward me with unnatural speed. The bell contains. Without it, they exist everywhere and nowhere, unbound by physical laws. The bell gives them form that can be controlled, directed. The other Daniel with the knife had reached the bell. As I watched, he plunged his blade into the rippling surface, exactly as I had done before. The resulting keening wail shook the tower to its foundations. That version of me vanished, presumably reset to the beginning of his cycle. But the bell's surface didn't smooth out. Instead, new fractures appeared, not just in the bell, but in the air around it, spreading outward like cracks in glass. Through them, I caught glimpses of other places, other times, the lighthouse newly built, the lighthouse in ruins, the rocky promontory with no structure at all, waves crashing over bare stone. The containment fails, shrieked one of the robed figures, its voice no longer human, the syllables clicking and wet. The leader turned to me, its head falling back to reveal not emptiness as I had seen before, but a face, or something that approximated one. Features shifted constantly, as if I were seeing dozens of different countenances superimposed. Only the eyes remained constant, ancient, knowing, filled with both cold calculation and something like fear. Pierce, it said, using a voice that sounded almost normal, almost human. Listen carefully. We are not your enemy. We are the Watchers, the Guardians. For millennia we have contained what lies beyond, channeled its power harmlessly. You're trying to bring them through, I accused, but with less certainty than before. We allow controlled manifestation, it corrected. Limited interaction that satisfies their curiosity without permitting full emergence. It is the compromise that has protected your kind since before you built cities. The fractures in reality continue to spread, widening. Through the largest, something moved, a massive shape, sinuous and dark. Without the bell, without us, there is no barrier at all, the leader continued urgently. They will come through everywhere, anywhere. Not physical as you understand it, but as thought, as impulse, as madness spreading through the collective consciousness of humanity. My other self, who had been standing frozen in the doorway, suddenly animated, rushing toward the bell with empty hands. The leader gestured, and one of the other robed figures intercepted him, catching him in an embrace that looked almost gentle. But when they separated, that Daniel collapsed, his eyes now empty pools of darkness. "You're killing me," I said, raising the knife defensively. "All versions of me. Only those who threaten the bell beyond repair," the feminine voice responded. Her hood had fallen back as well, revealing a face that was beautiful in one moment, grotesque the next, constantly shifting between states. "You are the anchor, Daniel. In every iteration, you come to witness. Your perception stabilizes the ritual, makes it possible. But you are not meant to interfere." The storm outside had reached impossible intensity. Lightning struck the lighthouse repeatedly, each flash illuminating the fractures in reality more clearly. They had spread throughout the chamber now, some large enough to step through. And through them, I could see gathering darkness. Movement. Intention. Doubt consumed me. What if they were telling the truth? What if the bell really was a containment mechanism rather than a portal? The knife felt suddenly heavier in my hand, its glow dimming as if responding to my uncertainty. "If I'm so important to your ritual," I said slowly, "why erase my memory each time? Why the cycle of forgetting and returning?" The leader and the female exchanged a glance. "Human minds cannot contain the truth for long without breaking," the leader replied. "The cycle protects you, allows you to function between summonings." "And the other people who've disappeared here? The hikers, the tourists?" I gestured toward where the corpse had been on the stairs. "Unfortunate," said the leader, genuine regret coloring its tone. "Some humans are drawn to the bell's energy but lack your resilience. They shatter upon exposure." A particularly violent flash of lightning was followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. One of the largest fractures in reality split further, widening from floor to ceiling. Beyond it writhed darkness given form, tentacles and limbs and things that had no name in human language, pressing against the thinning barrier. The leader turned from me to face this growing breach, raising its arms again. The other robed figures, except for the female still watching me, moved to join it, forming a semicircle before the fracture. They began a new chant, deeper and more guttural than before. The female stepped closer to me, her shifting face settling momentarily into a visage of painful beauty. "You have a choice, Daniel," she said softly. "Help us repair the bell, close the fractures, or watch as your world drowns in chaos beyond your comprehension." "How?" I asked, the knife now cool and inert in my grip. "Your blood on the bell. Freely given, not taken. The anchor's essence to stabilize the gateway." I looked at the knife, then at the fractures spreading throughout the chamber, the darkness gathering beyond them. The bell continued to shudder and pulse erratically at the center of it all. "And if I refuse?" Her face shifted to something ancient and terrible, then back to beauty. "Then what comes next is beyond anyone's control. The deep ones have waited eons for direct access. They will not be gentle in claiming it." I had no way to verify anything she told me. This could all be deception, manipulation to further their true goal of bringing these entities through. But the fractures were undeniably spreading, and what I glimpsed beyond them was nothing I wanted loosed upon the world. The bell tolled once more, a broken, dissonant sound that sent pain lancing through my skull. The leader and the others had managed to partially close the largest fracture, but new ones were appearing faster than they could address them. I made my decision. The knife's edge was impossibly sharp against my palm, parting skin with barely a sensation before blood welled dark and thick. I approached the bell as the female figure stepped aside, her shifting face settling into an expression of solemn approval. "The anchor accepts his role," she announced to the others, who continued their chant without breaking rhythm. The leader glanced back, nodding once before returning attention to the largest fracture, which pulsed with increasing frequency, darkness seeping through like smoke. I stood before the bell, its surface still chaotic with images, faces, landscapes, moments from across time. My own face appeared frequently now, versions of me from countless iterations of this cycle. Some looked determined, others terrified, still others eerily serene. All were me, yet none were quite the same. Press your hand to its center, instructed the female, her voice now directly in my mind rather than carried by air. Your blood freely given will reset the balance. I raised my bleeding palm toward the bell's rippling surface. But as I did, time seemed to slow around me. In that stretched moment, one of the images on the bell's surface caught my attention, a version of me with eyes that seemed more aware, more present than the others. This Daniel stared directly at me, and his lips moved with deliberate purpose. They lie. Just 2 words, but they crystallized the doubt that had been building inside me. I hesitated, my hand inches from the bell. Now, Daniel, urged the female, an edge entering her telepathic voice. The fractures spread. There is little time. The Daniel on the bell's surface was mouthing something else now. The knife. Into the heart. What are you waiting for? The female's beautiful face flickered, briefly revealing something insectoid beneath the human mask. In that moment, clarity struck me with the force of revelation. These beings weren't protecting humanity from the Deep Ones, they were the Deep Ones, or at least their agents. The bell wasn't a containment mechanism, but exactly what I had first suspected, a portal, a way for them to enter our reality fully. And my blood wouldn't close the fractures. It would complete the ritual, stabilize the doorway. Time snapped back to normal speed. In one fluid motion, I pivoted away from the bell and drove the knife directly into the female's chest, where a human heart would be. She made no sound, but her eyes widened in genuine shock. Her form rippled, the human appearance giving way to something else, a chitinous, multi-jointed body with too many limbs, all folding inward around the knife embedded in its central mass. The other robed figures sensed the betrayal instantly. Their chant faltered as they turned from the fractures toward me, hoods falling back to reveal similar transformations in progress, human features melting into something arthropod, cephalopod, utterly alien. The anchor betrays, hissed the leader, its voice no longer remotely human. Take him. I yanked the knife free from the female's collapsing form, her body crumbling into a pile of what looked like wet sand. The blade now pulsed with intense blue-white light, symbols blazing along its length. The other 6 converged on me, moving with unnatural speed, their robes falling away to reveal their true forms, chitinous exoskeletons, multiple jointed limbs, and features that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our reality could properly display. I backed toward the bell, knife held before me. Its light formed a barrier that the creatures hesitated to cross, but their patience was clearly limited. Beyond them, the fractures in reality continued to widen, darkness pressing against the thinning barriers. You understand nothing, the leader rasped, its mandibles clicking with each syllable. The cycle has existed for millennia. Your interference dooms everything. Maybe, I acknowledged, continuing my careful retreat toward the bell. Or maybe I'm finally breaking a pattern that was never meant to benefit humanity. The creature that had been the leader lunged forward, appendages extended. The knife slashed across them, light trailing in its wake. Where it cut, the creature's limbs dissolved into the same wet sand as the female. It shrieked in a frequency that shattered the few remaining intact windows. The others attacked as one, coming from multiple angles. I ducked beneath reaching limbs, slashed at others, fighting my way closer to the bell. Blood from my cut palm mingled with their strange ichor on the blade, causing the cymbals to pulse with renewed intensity. Lightning struck the lighthouse directly, the thunder immediate and deafening. In that blinding flash, I saw what truly surrounded me, not 6 separate entities but a single consciousness with multiple physical projections, all connected by threads of dark energy to the bell itself. Understanding flooded through me. The bell wasn't just a portal, it was an anchor point for these beings, allowing them to partially manifest in our reality. That's why they needed the ritual, needed me as a human observer to stabilize the process. Without the bell, they couldn't maintain physical form in our world. I dove forward as multiple limbs closed on the space where I'd stood. Rolling to my feet, I found myself directly before the bell, its surface now a maelstrom of images and faces, all contorted in expressions of terror or ecstasy. The largest fracture in reality had widened to fill nearly one entire wall of the chamber. Through it, I could see an alien landscape, a vast city of non-Euclidean geometry beneath a sky of swirling darkness. Massive shapes moved among impossible towers, and the longer I looked, the more my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. I tore my gaze away, focusing on the bell. The Daniel I had seen before was still visible on its surface, watching me intently. He pointed to a specific spot on the bell, a nexus where all the rippling patterns seemed to originate. The heart of the bell. The anchor point. Behind me, the creatures had regrouped, approaching more cautiously now, aware of the knife's power against them. The leader spoke, its voice resonating painfully in my skull. If you destroy the bell, both worlds collapse into chaos. You cannot comprehend what forces you're unleashing. Maybe not, I admitted, raising the knife. But I understand enough to know this cycle ends now. I plunged the blade directly into the spot the other Daniel had indicated, driving it with all my strength into the heart of the bell. For one heartbeat, absolute silence fell. Then the bell shattered, not into pieces, but into light. Blindingly intense, it exploded outward in a shockwave that threw me backwards. I felt my body impact the wall, felt stone cracking beneath me, but the pain was distant, theoretical. The creatures screamed in a harmonic chorus of agony as the light touched them, their forms dissolving not into sand this time but into nothingness. The fractures in reality began to close, the darkness beyond them receding. But something was wrong. The light wasn't stopping, it continued to intensify, consuming everything it touched. The stone walls of the lighthouse, the floor beneath me, the storm-racked sky visible through the windows, all were bleaching away, reality itself seeming to unravel. The knife had fallen from my grip in the explosion, but I could still see it, floating in midair where the bell had been, its symbols now burning so brightly they were all that remained visible in the growing whiteness. I couldn't move, couldn't even feel my body anymore. My consciousness seemed to be expanding, disconnecting from physical form. Through eyes that might no longer be physical, I watched the fractures seal completely, the last glimpses of that alien city vanishing. Then the knife itself shattered, its fragments dissolving into points of blue-white light that began to orbit a central void, a perfect darkness that formed where the bell had been. The cycle breaks, came a voice, or perhaps a thought, from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't the leader, wasn't any of the creatures. It felt older, faster. But all patterns must complete. The darkness at the center began to expand, consuming the orbiting lights, growing to fill my field of vision. And in its depths, I began to see everything. Past, present, future, all simultaneous, all connected. Myself at the lighthouse, countless times. The ritual, performed across centuries. The bell, forged in some ancient time from metal not of this earth. And beyond that, the truth. The bell hadn't been a portal for the deep ones to enter our world. It had been a window through which they could observe us, interact in limited ways. They fed not on flesh or blood but on human consciousness itself, on fear, on wonder, on the expansion of mind that comes from encountering the truly alien. For millennia they had used the lighthouse as their observation post, the bell as their instrument of contact. And I had been their unconscious collaborator, returned time and again through the cycle to serve as anchor, as constant as the human consciousness they found most compatible with their needs. Now that connection was severed. The bell destroyed, the cycle broken. But the deep ones still existed beyond our reality, and their hunger remained. New pattern forms, came that vast thought again. New cycle begins. The expanding darkness suddenly contracted, condensing into a single point of infinite density. Then, with a silent explosion, it inverted, dark becoming light, emptiness becoming substance. I gasped, lungs suddenly working again, body rematerializing. But I wasn't in the lighthouse. I stood on a rocky beach, waves crashing nearby, the taste of salt on my lips. Dawn light painted the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. Disoriented, I turned in a complete circle. The lighthouse stood intact on its promontory, white against the lightning sky, no sign of damage or the reality-shattering events I had experienced. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream? But the memory remained vivid, undeniable. And my hand, I looked down to find the cut across my palm, partially healed as if days old rather than minutes. Something glinted in the sand near my feet. I knelt to uncover a fragment of metal, black and strange, warm to the touch despite the cool morning air. A piece of the bell, somehow transported here with me. As I held it, knowledge flooded through me, not in words or images but in pure understanding. The deep ones had not been destroyed or banished. They had simply changed strategy. The bell was gone, the old cycle broken. But they had created a new anchor, a new pattern. Me. I was no longer just an observer, a temporary anchor for their manifestation. Now I carried a piece of them within me, a splinter of consciousness, alien and vast, integrated with my own. Through me, they would experience humanity directly. Through me, they would feed on fear and wonder in a new way. The fragment of bell grew warm in my hand, then seemed to melt, flowing like quicksilver up my arm, disappearing beneath my skin. I felt it spread throughout my body, a cold fire tracing my veins, altering me on some fundamental level. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of expansion, of potential. The knowledge of countless cycles, of realities beyond human comprehension, now accessible to me in ways I couldn't yet fully grasp. A sound drew my attention back to the lighthouse. A figure stood at the base of the tower, a man with a heavy equipment bag slung over his shoulder, looking up at the structure with an expression of anticipation. It was me. Another me, at the beginning of what should have been another cycle. As I watched, that Daniel checked something in his hand, the invitation, the Polaroid photograph I had received days ago, and then began to climb the path toward the lighthouse keeper's cottage. I understood then. The cycle wasn't broken, it had transformed. No longer was I doomed to repeat the same pattern of discovery and forgetting. Now I existed outside it, watching as other versions continued the original sequence. And something else watched through my eyes. I felt them stirring in my consciousness, the deep ones, or at least a fragment of their awareness. Not controlling me, not directing my actions, but experiencing everything I experienced, learning what it meant to be human in a far more intimate way than their previous observation had allowed. What now? I wondered, half expecting a response from the presence I felt within. None came directly, but a compulsion arose, gentle but insistent. I began walking toward the lighthouse, toward the other Daniel who was just now entering the keeper's cottage. I understood my new role. I would observe him as he discovered the journal, as he heard the bells toll, as he climbed the tower to find the robed figures. I would watch as he made choices that might differ from mine, that might lead to different outcomes. And perhaps, if necessary, I would intervene. The sun cleared the horizon as I reached the cottage door, casting my shadow long across the weathered wood. Inside, I could hear movement, myself, in another iteration, beginning a journey I had already completed. I raised my hand to knock. The shadow my arm cast against the door wasn't entirely human in shape. The new cycle had begun. The door opened before my knuckles made contact. The other Daniel stood frozen in the threshold, eyes widening as he took in my appearance. I wondered briefly what he saw. Did I still look fully human, or had the changes I felt internally manifested in my physical form? "Who are you?" he asked, voice steady despite the shock evident on his face. He looked exactly as I remembered myself days ago, exhausted from the drive, curious about the lighthouse, completely unaware of what awaited him. "Someone who's walked this path before," I replied, studying him with the strange double vision I now possessed, human eyes and something else, something that perceived layers of reality invisible to normal perception. Around this Daniel, I could see faint traces of temporal energy, the bell's influence already beginning to work on him, preparing him for the ritual to come. But there was something different about this iteration. The patterns were altered, less defined. The changes I had made to the cycle had affected more than just my personal timeline. "What do you want?" he asked, one hand reaching into his pocket. For a pocket knife, I knew, the small Swiss Army knife I always carried while exploring abandoned places. A pathetically inadequate defense against what lurked in the lighthouse. "To show you something," I said, stepping forward. He retreated instinctively, allowing me into the cottage. The interior was exactly as I remembered, the wooden table, the chairs, the wall of disturbing charcoal drawings. The leather-bound journal lay open, just as it had been when I first discovered it. My other self watched me warily, keeping distance between us. "How did you get out here?" "There are no other cars on the road." "I didn't come by road," I answered truthfully. "And I don't have much time to explain. The bell will toll soon, and once it does, events will proceed rapidly." At the mention of the bell, his expression changed, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. "What bell?" Instead of answering, I moved to the wall of drawings, placing my palm flat against the central image of the bell. The charcoal seemed to ripple beneath my touch, the symbols beginning to glow faintly with the same blue-white light the knife had emitted. "What the hell?" The other Daniel stepped closer despite his obvious alarm, scientific curiosity temporarily overriding caution, a trait that had led me into countless dangerous situations over the years. "The ritual has been performed here for centuries," I said, not looking at him but at the images that now animated beneath my touch, revealing their true nature. The deep ones, beings from another reality, created this place as an observation post. The bell is their instrument, the lighthouse their window into our world. "Deep ones," he repeated skeptically. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing." "It's not a game." I turned to face him fully. "In approximately 6 minutes, you'll hear a bell toll from the lighthouse tower. You'll investigate. You'll find robed figures performing a ritual around a floating bell made of black metal. They'll tell you you're essential to their process, an anchor that stabilizes their manifestation. His face paled slightly. How could you possibly know how? Because I've lived it, I interrupted. Dozens of times. Hundreds, perhaps. The cycle repeats endlessly. You arrive, you witness, your memory is erased, and eventually you're drawn back again when they need you. The other Daniel shook his head, backing toward the door. You're clearly unwell. I think you should leave. Look at the journal, I said, gesturing to the open book on the table. The final page. Reluctantly, he glanced down at it, and I saw the shock register on his face as he read the words I knew were there. This is my 5th arrival. How many times have you returned, Daniel? How do you know my name? He whispered. Because it's my name too, I replied simply. In the silence that followed, the first toll of the bell reached us, deep, resonant, vibrating through the floorboards and into our bones. The other Daniel flinched, eyes darting toward the tower visible through the cottage window. It's starting, I said. Now you have a choice to make. You can follow the path I took originally, climb the tower, confront the entities, attempt to destroy the bell. Or you can try something different. Why would I believe any of this? He demanded, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing uncertainty. I extended my hand, palm up. The skin seemed to ripple slightly, and beneath it, patterns of light traced my veins, the fragment of the bell now integrated into my being, changing me with each passing hour. Because deep down, you already sensed the truth, I said. You've felt it since you received the invitation, that this place is familiar, that you've done this before, that something is watching you through the thin membrane of reality. The bell tolled again, louder this time. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows. What happened to you? He asked, staring at my unnaturally illuminated veins. I broke the cycle, or thought I did, I explained. I destroyed the bell, but in doing so, I became something new, a different kind of anchor. Now I exist outside the normal flow of time, observing the iterations as they continue. And the deep ones? He spoke the name with a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. They're still here, still watching. But differently now. Through me. I gestured to the drawings on the wall. These are pale imitations of their true form. They exist in dimensions beyond our comprehension, feeding not on flesh but on consciousness itself, on fear, wonder, the expansion of mind that comes from encountering the truly alien. The other Daniel's gaze moved between me and the lighthouse tower, conflict evident in his expression. The bell tolled a third time. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then what's my purpose here? Why tell me any of this? Because the cycle is changing, I replied. My intervention has created ripples, alterations in the pattern. This iteration is different from the ones before. And you have an opportunity one never had, foreknowledge. I moved to the table and picked up the journal, turning to pages I hadn't examined in my original visit, pages that contained diagrams and instructions in various languages, some recognizable, others completely alien. There's a third option beyond either participating in their ritual or trying to destroy it, I said, finding the page I sought and turning the book toward him. A possibility of genuine communication, of understanding. The diagram showed the bell, but with additional symbols arranged around it in a specific pattern, symbols that matched neither those used by the robed figures nor those on the knife that had disrupted the ritual. What is this? He asked, studying the page with growing interest. A different kind of ritual, I explained. One not designed for observation or manifestation, but for true contact. Equal exchange rather than parasitic feeding. The bell tolled a fourth time. We have little time remaining. Why would I want contact with these beings? The skepticism in his voice was understandable. Because they possess knowledge beyond anything humanity has imagined, I said. And because the cycle will continue regardless. Better to transform it into something mutually beneficial than to remain trapped in an exploitative pattern. I could see him wavering, the scientist in him intrigued despite his fear. The bell tolled a fifth time, and the walls of the cottage seemed to vibrate with the sound. What do I need to do? He asked finally. I smiled, feeling a surge of something like hope, an emotion I hadn't expected to experience again after what I'd become. Take the journal. Go to the tower. When you reach the lantern room, draw these symbols on the floor around the bell in this exact arrangement. I pointed to specific markings in the diagram. Use anything, chalk, blood, even water. The intent and pattern matter more than the medium. And then you speak these words. I indicated a phrase written in an alphabet I couldn't identify but somehow understood. It's a request for dialogue rather than submission. An invitation rather than a summoning. The other Daniel committed the phrase to memory, his lips moving silently as he practiced it. What will happen? I don't know precisely, I admitted. This is new territory. But it will change the nature of the interaction. And perhaps break the cycle in a way I failed to achieve. A sixth toll of the bell shook dust from the ceiling beams. The storm had reached its peak outside, lightning illuminating the room in staccato flashes. Go now, I urged, pressing the journal into his hands. They'll try to stop you when they realize what you're attempting. The robed figures are merely projections, but they can still affect physical reality. What about you? He asked, moving toward the door. Are you coming? I shook my head. I exist outside the pattern now. My presence would complicate things, potentially destabilize what you're trying to achieve. He paused at the threshold, rain blowing around him. If this works, will I become like you? The question carried layers of meaning, curiosity, fear, perhaps even a hint of desire for transformation. I considered lying to reassure him, but truth seemed more important now than comfort. I don't know, I said honestly. Every choice creates branching realities. Your path may diverge significantly from mine. He nodded, accepting this ambiguity. Then, with one last look at me, his past self, his possible future, he stepped out into the storm and began running toward the lighthouse tower. Through my altered perception, I watched him go, the temporal energies swirling around him shifting, reorganizing into new patterns. The deep ones within my consciousness stirred with interest, their attention focused on this unexpected development. I remained in the cottage, moving to the window to observe. Lightning struck the lighthouse repeatedly as the other Daniel reached its base and disappeared inside. The bell's tolling had become continuous now, a single sustained note that vibrated at a frequency just shy of pain. Minutes passed as I stood motionless at the window. Within me, the fragment of alien consciousness expanded further, showing me glimpses of their realm, vast cities of impossible geometry, oceans of liquid that wasn't water, skies filled with mathematical constructs instead of stars. Beauty and terror in equal measure, comprehensible only because I was becoming something other than fully human. Then, abruptly, the bell fell silent. For one breathless moment, reality seemed to pause, the storm frozen in mid-flash, raindrops suspended in air, time itself waiting for resolution. Light erupted from the lantern room at the top of the tower, not the sickly green glow of the ritual I had witnessed, but clean blue-white radiance that pierced the storm clouds, creating a perfect column that extended upward into infinity. Within that light, I sensed communication occurring, complex, multidimensional exchange of information between human consciousness and something vastly older and stranger. Not parasitic feeding, but genuine dialogue. The storm began to disperse with unnatural speed, clouds parting to reveal a night sky filled with stars arranged in unfamiliar patterns. The light from the tower pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then condensed, drawing inward until it was contained entirely within the lighthouse. I felt the change ripple through reality like a stone dropped in still water. The cycle hadn't merely been altered, it had been transformed completely. The deep ones within me reacted with something akin to surprise, an emotion I wouldn't have thought them capable of experiencing. Dawn broke suddenly, the sun rising hours ahead of schedule, golden lights spilling across the rocky coastline. The lighthouse stood pristine in the morning glow, no evidence of the metaphysical cataclysm that had occurred within. I waited, unsure what would emerge. Would my other self have survived the contact? Had he succeeded where I had failed, finding a middle path between submission and destruction? The door of the lighthouse tower opened, and a figure stepped out into the sunlight. It was Daniel, but changed, transformed. He moved with fluid grace that wasn't quite human, and around him, reality seemed to bend slightly, accommodating a presence larger than his physical form could contain. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment of connection, I understood. Where I had become a vessel, he had become a bridge. The fragment of alien consciousness I carried was isolated, contained. What he embodied was an active conduit, a living connection between worlds. He raised a hand in greeting, or perhaps farewell, and I returned the gesture. No words were necessary. We had transcended the need for such limited communication. I felt myself beginning to fade, my purpose in this iteration complete. The changes we had made to the cycle were fundamental, irreversible. The parasitic observation post had become a doorway for genuine exchange. The bell that had trapped and exploited human consciousness now facilitated mutual understanding. As my form grew transparent, the cottage around me already dissolving into mist, I experienced one final insight, a gift from the deep ones within me. They showed me the true nature of reality, not linear time progressing from past to future, but an infinite web of possibilities, all existing simultaneously. Every choice, every moment of every possible life, preserved eternally in the cosmic architecture. In one strand of that web, Daniel Pierce arrived at an abandoned lighthouse and became an unwitting pawn in an ancient ritual, trapped in an endless cycle of forgetting and return. In another, he destroyed the bell and became a vessel for fragments of alien consciousness existing outside normal time. And in yet another, the strand now solidifying before me, he transformed the relationship between humanity and the deep ones from exploitation to communion, opening doorways of perception that would eventually reshape both realities. None of these outcomes erased the others. All existed, all were real, all continued. My final thought as I faded completely was not fear or regret, but profound wonder at the infinite complexity of existence. The metal bell had never been the true instrument of connection. Consciousness itself was the resonating chamber, vibrating with possibilities across the multidimensional expanse of reality. And somewhere in that expanse, I would always exist, caught in the endless reverberations of a bell that transcended time itself. Have you ever felt like something was watching you from the darkness? Not something human, but something ancient and patient that has been waiting for you specifically? The submersible hummed as it descended through the midnight waters of the North Atlantic. I pressed my forehead against the thick viewport glass, watching the last hints of surface light fade into absolute darkness. Commander Eric Reynolds, that's me, 42 years old, retired Navy SEAL with distinguished service in 3 combat zones and enough shrapnel in my left leg to set off airport metal detectors. now working private security for Oceanic Research Station Theta. Good money, they said. Peaceful work, they promised. 30 minutes to docking, Commander Reynolds, the pilot, announced through the intercom. Young guy, couldn't be more than 25. Too cheerful for someone piloting us 7,000 feet below the surface. Thanks, I muttered, not taking my eyes off the viewport. The darkness outside was absolute now, broken only by the submersible's external lights cutting blue-white cones through the black water. Something flickered at the edge of the light, probably just marine snow, those endless particles of organic matter drifting down from the surface world. But for a moment, it had looked like movement. Purposeful movement. I blinked away the thought. 3 tours in war zones had left me with a hypervigilance that medication only dulled, never erased. My therapist called it tactical awareness. My ex-wife called it paranoia before she left. The descent continued in silence, the pressure building around us, the hull occasionally creaking in protest. I'd done this journey a dozen times in my military days, but something felt different now. A heaviness beyond the physical pressure. A sensation like being watched. Through the front viewport, the first lights of Station Theta appeared, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules anchored to the seabed, resembling a giant metallic spider. Normally, the sight of the station brought relief. Today, something about its silhouette against the ocean floor made my skin crawl. Commencing docking procedures, the pilot announced. Station Theta has confirmed our approach vector. The station grew larger as we approached, but something wasn't right. Several sections appeared dark when they should have been illuminated. Standard protocol required all external lights to remain on during submersible approaches. Are you seeing this? I asked the pilot. Seeing what, sir? I pointed at the viewport. Those dark sections. B and D modules should be lit up. The pilot checked his instruments. Station reports all systems normal. Maybe just routine maintenance? Before I could respond, the submersible shuddered violently. A high-pitched scraping sound dragged along the hull, like metal fingers searching for a way in. What the hell was that? I demanded. The pilot's hands flew across his control panel. Nothing on sensors. Might have been debris. But I knew debris. I'd encountered underwater debris before. This had felt directed, intentional. The submersible aligned with the docking tube, mechanisms whirring as the airlocks engaged. The connection sequence completed with a hollow metallic thud that reverberated through the vessel. Docking complete, the pilot said, his voice betraying relief. Pressure equalizing. You can disembark in 2 minutes. As the airlock cycled, I gathered my duffel bag and waited by the hatch. My hand instinctively checked for the combat knife strapped to my ankle, an old habit from deployment days. Technically against station regulations, but some rules weren't worth following when you'd seen what I had. The hatch hissed open, revealing the sterile white corridor of the station's reception module. I expected to be greeted by Dr. Abigail Morrison, the station's administrator. Instead, the corridor was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing down the empty passage. No response. I stepped through the hatch, the familiar weight of underwater pressure settlements making the station groan around me. The air tasted metallic, tinged with something else, something organic and unpleasant. Anyone here? I tried again. The pilot peered through the hatch behind me. That's strange. They always send a welcoming party. Stay with the sub, I told him. I'll check it out. I moved down the corridor, every sense heightened. My footsteps echoed on the metal floor, each one sounding louder than it should have. The flickering lights created moving shadows that seemed to follow my progress. At the end of the corridor, the main access door to the central hub stood partially open, another protocol violation. I approached cautiously, listening for voices or movement. Nothing. I pushed the door open with my foot and stepped through into the central hub, a large circular room with workstations arranged around a central holographic projection unit. Several corridors branched off from this room, leading to different station modules. The hub was deserted, screens displaying normal operations data but no personnel in sight. Coffee mugs sat at workstations, some still steaming. A tablet displayed an unfinished email. Everything suggested the occupants had left in a hurry. A notification flashed on the main screen, automated systems engaged. Personnel count, 28. 28 people should be on this station. Where were they all? The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the hub into darkness for several seconds before returning. In that moment of darkness, I could have sworn I heard the distant sound of metal wheels on tracks, a rhythmic clicking that had no place 7,000 feet underwater. When the lights returned, I noticed something on one of the workstation screens, a security feed showing a corridor in what appeared to be the residential module. A figure stood at the far end, motionless, facing away from the camera. The timestamp showed this was live footage. I tapped the screen to enlarge the image. The figure wore what looked like an old-fashioned conductor's uniform, complete with cap. As I watched, the figure slowly turned toward the camera, but where a face should have been was only darkness, a void deeper than the ocean outside. The screen suddenly went blank. All the monitors in the hub shut down simultaneously, leaving only the emergency lighting operational. From somewhere deep in the station came the unmistakable sound of metal wheels on tracks, growing louder. And then a voice over the station's intercom, distorted, barely human, all aboard. Final destination. That's when the screaming started. I turned toward the sound, my hand automatically reaching for the knife at my ankle. The screams were coming from the residential module, the same one shown in the security feed moments before. As I moved toward that corridor, the station lights began to pulse in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. With each flash, the corridor seemed to elongate, stretching impossibly before my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence more terrifying than the noise. I pressed forward, fighting the strange visual distortion. The corridor no longer felt like it belonged on an underwater research station. The walls had taken on a strange texture, almost like the interior of an old railway car, brass fixtures appearing where there should have been modern equipment. Dr. Morrison? I called out. Anyone? My voice sounded wrong, muffled and distant, as if I were speaking underwater without equipment. I reached the entrance to the residential module and found the door partially open, a dark liquid seeping from beneath it. The smell hit me immediately, salt water mixed with something metallic and organic. Drawing my knife, I pushed the door open with my shoulder and entered. The residential module had been transformed. Where there should have been individual quarters lining a central corridor, there was now what appeared to be the interior of an antique railway car, plush red velvet seats facing each other across a narrow aisle, brass luggage racks overhead, and windows that looked out not onto the ocean depths but onto a midnight landscape rushing by at impossible speed. Most disturbing of all were the passengers, the station's personnel, seated rigidly, staring straight ahead with glassy, unseeing eyes. Their skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and dark water dripped steadily from their clothes onto the floor. At the far end of the car stood the figure from the security feed, the conductor, back turned to me. As if sensing my presence, the figure began to turn. I backed away, my rational mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This was impossible. I must be hallucinating. Maybe there had been a contaminant in the air supply, or... "You're late, Commander Reynolds," the conductor said, voice like grinding metal. "But your berth has been prepared nonetheless." The figure fully turned, revealing not a void where the face should be, but something worse, a face composed entirely of crawling darkness, shifting and writhing like thousands of tiny eels or worms. "Your ticket, please," it said, extending a gloved hand toward me. I turned and ran, back through the door and into the corridor, which had now fully transformed into the connecting passage between railway cars. The rhythmic clickety-clack of wheels on tracks filled my ears, accompanied by the groan of the station structure around me. As I ran, I caught glimpses through windows that shouldn't exist, flashes of a nightmarish landscape, twisted trees, and ruined structures beneath a moonless sky. I reached for my military-issue satellite phone to call for emergency extraction, but found instead an antique railway ticket in my pocket, my name inscribed in flowing script that seemed to move across the paper. Final destination, the dark below. I reached the central hub, hoping to find it unchanged, to find some anchor to reality. Instead, the circular room had transformed into the grand concourse of a Victorian railway station, the ceiling lost in darkness above, platforms stretching into shadowy distances on all sides. And everywhere I looked, figures moved in the shadows, limping, dragging, or gliding with unnatural smoothness. All heading toward waiting trains whose engines breathed steam and darkness. I needed to get back to the submersible, to warn the pilot, to escape this madness. I turned toward where the docking bay should be, only to find a mass of arrivals and departures board where the corridor had been. Every destination on the board read the same thing, the dark below. The lighting changed, the emergency red giving way to an eerie blue glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. In that light, I saw my hands and realized with horror that my skin had begun to take on the same grayish hue as the passengers in the railway car. I was changing. The station was changing. Reality itself was being warped around me. From behind, the sound of measured footsteps approaching. The click of formal shoes on the platform. "Last call, Commander," the conductor's voice said. "The black tide waits for no man." I turned slowly, knife held before me, though I already knew it would be useless against whatever this entity was. The conductor stood 10 feet away, uniform now dripping with seawater, cap pulled low over that writhing face. In one gloved hand, it held an antique railway lantern that glowed with the same eerie blue light now filling the station. "What is this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you?" The conductor's head tilted at an impossible angle. "I am merely the collector of fares, Commander. The conveyor of souls. The black tide rises, and with it, the railway between worlds opens once more." "This isn't real," I insisted, even as the floor beneath my feet began to transform into wooden railway sleepers, the gaps between them revealing not the level below but an infinite darkness. "Reality is such a fragile concept 7,000 feet below the surface," the conductor replied. "Dreams and nightmares have weight here. They have substance. They have hunger." The conductor raised the lantern higher. "The question isn't what is real, Commander Reynolds. The question is, are you awake or asleep right now?" And with that question echoing in my mind, I felt the floor give way beneath me, the wooden sleepers splitting apart to reveal the abyss below. As I fell, the conductor's lantern light grew more distant above me, until I was falling through absolute darkness, the clickety-clack of phantom train wheels the only sound in my ears. I jerked awake in my bunk aboard the submersible, gasping for breath, body drenched in cold sweat. A dream. Just a dream. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. 30 minutes to docking, Commander Reynolds. I sat up, heart racing. A premonition? Some kind of waking nightmare brought on by stress? Through the viewport, I could see the lights of Station Theta appearing in the distance. Several sections appeared dark when they should have been illuminated. And somewhere, at the very edge of hearing, I detected the faint sound of metal wheels on tracks. What would you do if your nightmares began to bleed into reality? If the line between what you dreamed and what you lived became so blurred that you could no longer tell where one ended and the other began? I stood frozen in the submersible, staring at Station Theta through the viewport. The dark sections shouldn't have been there, exactly like in my dream. My pulse quickened as the submersible approached the docking bay, my mind racing through possibilities. Coincidence? Or something far worse? Commander Reynolds, are you feeling all right? The pilot, Mason, according to his nameplate, was watching me with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. A ghost. If only it were that simple. I'm fine, I lied, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Just anxious to get aboard. The truth was, I wanted nothing more than to order Mason to turn the submersible around, to head back to the surface, back to sunlight and solid ground. But that wasn't an option. I had a job to do, and 28 lives depending on me. The docking sequence began, mechanical arms extending from the station to secure the submersible. I listened for that unnatural scraping sound from my dream, but heard only the normal mechanical whirs and clicks of the docking procedure. Docking complete. Pressure equalizing. Mason's voice was steady, professional. No hint of the unease that had characterized the pilot in my dream. I shouldered my duffel bag, my fingers brushing the satellite phone in my pocket, not a railway ticket. Still, I found myself checking my ankle for the combat knife. It was there, its presence reassuring. As the airlock cycled open, I braced myself for an empty corridor, flickering lights, the smell of seawater and decay. Instead, Dr. Abigail Morrison stood waiting, clipboard in hand, expression impatient but otherwise normal. Commander Reynolds, she said, extending her hand. Welcome to Theta. You're the last arrival for this rotation. I shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, the warmth of her skin. Very much alive. Very much real. Sorry about the partial blackout, she continued, gesturing toward a nearby monitor showing the station's exterior. We're running tests on the external lighting systems in sectors B and D. Nothing to worry about. An explanation. A rational, logical explanation. I felt some of the tension drain from my shoulders. Good to be here, I said, finding my voice. Looking forward to getting settled. Dr. Morrison nodded briskly. I'll show you to your quarters, then give you the tour. We've had some unusual occurrences lately that I want to discuss with you privately. My relief evaporated. Unusual occurrences? She glanced around, lowering her voice. Not here. Let's get you settled first. We walked through the reception corridor, which looked exactly as it should, clean, well-lit, functional. No flickering lights, no mysterious transformations. Just an underwater research station, 7,000 feet below the surface. As we reached the main access door to the central hub, Dr. Morrison paused, her keycard hovering over the scanner. I should warn you, the crew is a bit on edge. We've had some equipment malfunctions, strange noises. Probably just the pressure at this depth affecting systems, but it's got people jumpy. She swiped her card, and the door slid open to reveal the central hub, busy with personnel, screens displaying normal operations data, the central holographic projector showing a three-dimensional map of the surrounding seabed. Everything looked normal, professional, expected. Yet as we crossed the hub toward the residential corridor, I caught snippets of conversation. Heard it again last night, like something moving through the ventilation system. Dreams are getting worse. I can barely sleep. Swear I saw someone standing at the end of my bed, but when I turned on the light, Dr. Morrison led me down the residential corridor, which looked nothing like a railway car. Standard modular design, doors spaced evenly on both sides, nameplates identifying occupants. We stopped at one Mark Reynolds, E, security chief. Home sweet home, she said, swiping her master keycard. The door slid open to reveal a small but efficiently designed cabin, bunk, desk, storage locker, private bathroom. Get settled, then meet me in my office in 30 minutes. I'll be at the end of the administrative corridor. After she left, I unpacked methodically, military habits taking over. Clothes in the locker, toiletries in the bathroom, satellite phone and tablet charging on the desk. The routine helped calm my nerves, ground me in reality. The quarters were silent except for the constant low hum of the station's life support systems, a white noise that faded from consciousness after a few minutes. I sat on the edge of the bunk, trying to make sense of my dream and its eerie similarities to what I'd found upon arrival. A coincidence? It had to be. The dark modules, the sense of unease among the crew, all logical, explainable phenomena that my sleeping brain had incorporated into a nightmare. I checked my watch. 20 minutes before I needed to meet Morrison. Enough time to splash some water on my face and collect myself. In the small bathroom, I turned on the tap and leaned over the sink. The water was cold, bracing, real. I looked up into the mirror and froze. Standing behind me in the reflection was a figure in a dark uniform, face obscured by shadow. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. Looking back at the mirror, I saw only my own reflection, pale, eyes wide with fear, water dripping from my face. Had I imagined it? A trick of light and shadow, perhaps, or my mind still processing fragments of the nightmare? The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too confined. I stepped back into the main room, my breathing shallow and quick. Get it together, Reynolds. You faced worse than this. I checked my watch again. 15 minutes. I decided to head to Morrison's office early, better than sitting alone with my thoughts. The residential corridor was quiet as I made my way toward the administrative section. Most of the crew would be at their workstations around the station. The lighting was bright, constant, nothing like the flickering horror show of my dream. As I walked, I noticed water droplets on the floor, a small trail leading along the corridor. Probably someone who'd just come from the showers. I followed the trail, which turned toward the administrative corridor. The droplets became larger, more frequent, forming small puddles. Not shower water, then. Too much volume. Perhaps a leak in one of the ceiling pipes? I looked up, searching for the source, but the ceiling panels were dry. Yet the puddles continued ahead of me, growing larger. The administrative corridor was darker than the residential section, several of the overhead lights either dimmed or inactive. The puddles led directly to Morrison's office at the end. I approached cautiously, noting that the door was slightly ajar. From inside came the sound of movement, papers rustling, drawers opening and closing. "Dr. Morrison?" I called, pushing the door open wider. The office was empty. No, not empty, unoccupied. Papers were scattered across the desk, drawers pulled open, a coffee mug overturned, its contents forming a dark pool on the surface. And on the wall behind the desk, written in what looked horribly like blood, "The dark below awaits." My hand went to my knife as I backed out of the office. Vandalism? A sick joke? Or something far worse? I pulled out my satellite phone to call for security backup, but the screen remained dark. Dead battery? Impossible. I just put it on the charger. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. But in those moments of darkness, I heard it, the distant sound of metal wheels on tracks, echoing through the station structure. I ran back toward the central hub, determined to raise the alarm. The sound grew louder as I ran, the clickety-clack of phantom train wheels seeming to come from all directions at once. The hub was deserted when I arrived, the personnel who had been working there just minutes earlier nowhere to be seen. The screen still displayed normal operations data, but superimposed over several of them was an image that made my blood run cold, a railway timetable, destinations listed in flowing script that seemed to move and writhe as I watched. The dark below, Platform 1, departure imminent. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, forced myself to breathe slowly. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. When I opened my eyes, the screens would be normal again. 1, 2, 3. The sound of wheels grew louder. 4, 5, 6. Something cold and wet brushed against my hand. 7, 8, 9. "Ticket, please." A voice like grinding metal, right beside my ear. 10. I opened my eyes and found myself staring not at the central hub, but at a vast railway platform shrouded in mist. The floor beneath my feet had transformed into weathered wooden planks, stretching away into darkness in both directions. Above, instead of the hub ceiling, an impossibly high glass and iron dome caught the faint bluish light from outside. And before me, on tracks that shouldn't exist, stood a massive steam locomotive, black as the deepest ocean trench, brass fittings gleaming dully, smokestack belching not steam but what looked like swirling darkness. The black tide was emblazoned on its side in peeling gold letters. "This isn't real," I whispered, even as the cold wind from the phantom train washed over me, carrying the smell of seawater and decay. "Reality is perception, Commander," came a voice from behind me. "And perception can be adjusted." I turned to find Dr. Morrison standing there, but not as I had seen her earlier. Her skin had taken on that same grayish pallor from my dream, her clothes dripping with seawater, her eyes reflecting the eerie blue light that seemed to emanate from the train itself. "What's happening?" I demanded. "What is this place?" Morrison's lips curved in what might have been a smile, but her eyes remained cold, dead. The border between worlds thins in certain places. Deep underwater. High in the mountains. In the frozen wastes of the poles. Places where humans don't belong. She gestured toward the train. Sometimes, the border disappears altogether. "This is a hallucination," I insisted. "Mass hysteria. Something in the station's air supply." "Is it?" Morrison reached out and grabbed my wrist, her touch ice cold and wet. "Does this feel like a hallucination, Commander?" I pulled away, my skin burning where she had touched me. "The crew, where are they?" Already aboard. She nodded toward the passenger cars behind the locomotive. Through the windows, I could see shadowy figures seated in rows, motionless, staring straight ahead. The black tide waits for no one, but our conductor made an exception for you. As if summoned by her words, a figure appeared at the open door of the nearest passenger car, the same conductor from my nightmare, uniform dark and dripping, face void of writhing darkness beneath the brim of his cap. All aboard, the figure announced, voice echoing unnaturally across the platform. Final boarding call for the dark below. I'm not getting on that train, I said, backing away. Morrison's expression hardened. You misunderstand, Commander. This isn't an invitation. The ticket has already been purchased. Your berth has been prepared. I turned to run, but the platform had changed behind me, stretching away into infinite darkness, no exit in sight. From all around came the sound of movement, shuffling, dragging footsteps approaching from the mist. Shadowy figures emerged, station personnel, but changed, transformed. Their skin the same gray as Morrison's, their eyes reflecting that same eerie blue light, their movements jerky and unnatural as they converged on me from all sides. What do you want from me? I shouted, drawing my knife even as I knew it would be useless against so many. The conductor stepped down from the train, moving with unnatural smoothness across the platform. What? We want nothing from you specifically, Commander. You are merely convenient. A mind already fractured by war, by trauma, by guilt. Easy to access. Easy to use as a conduit. A conduit for what? The conductor raised a gloved hand, and the mist around us swirled, forming images, the station as I had first seen it through the submersible viewport, but transformed, twisted, segments of it reshaped into something that resembled an enormous, nightmarish version of the train before me. For our emergence, the conductor said. For the black tide to rise from the dark below and sweep across your world. The images shifted, showing the ocean's surface, coastal cities, all consumed by a darkness that moved with purpose and hunger. This station is built upon an ancient threshold, Morrison explained, her voice taking on the same metallic quality as the conductor's. A gateway that has been closed for millennia. Until now. Why now? I asked, playing for time, searching desperately for any means of escape. Because you brought the key, the conductor said. In your dreams. In your nightmares. In the fractured spaces of your mind where reality bleeds into fantasy. With a gloved hand, the conductor reached toward my forehead. I tried to back away, but found myself unable to move, feet seemingly fused to the platform beneath me. The gloved fingers touched my temple, and pain exploded behind my eyes, white-hot, searing agony that tore a scream from my throat. In that pain came flashes of memory, not my own, but older, ancient, belonging to something that had waited in darkness for countless ages. I saw the true form of the entity that called itself the conductor, a vast, writhing mass of darkness shot through with that same eerie blue light, existing in a place where physical laws held no meaning. I saw its hunger, its patient waiting, its gradual influence on the dreams of those who ventured too close to its prison deep beneath the ocean floor. And I saw how it had been using me, my nightmares, my fractured psyche, as a conduit to weaken the barriers between worlds. The pain subsided suddenly, leaving me gasping, on my knees on the wooden planks of the platform. Around me, the transformed crew of Station Theta watched with those glowing blue eyes, Morrison among them. The gateway is opening, the conductor announced. The black tide rises. The train let out a whistle, not the sound of steam, but a wailing, agonized cry that seemed to contain countless voices. The ground beneath the platform began to tremble. All aboard, the conductor repeated, gesturing toward the open door of the passenger car. Your final journey awaits. The crew members began to move toward the train, filing in through the doors, taking their seats inside the ghostly carriages. Morrison followed, pausing at the door to look back at me. You can't stop what's coming, Commander, she said, her voice no longer her own. The threshold has already been crossed. I struggled to my feet, knife still clutched in my hand. I won't be part of this. The conductor tilted his head at that impossible angle. You already are. With those words, searing pain shot through my head once more, and I collapsed to the platform, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. I awoke with a gasp, sitting upright in my bunk aboard the submersible. Sweat soaked my clothes, my heart pounding in my chest. Another dream? Or something more? The pilot's voice came over the intercom. 30 minutes to docking, Commander Reynolds. I looked through the viewport. Station Theta loomed in the distance, several sections dark when they should have been illuminated. Just like before. I stood on shaky legs and made my way to the small bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection stared back, pale, exhausted, eyes wild with fear. But there, at my temple where the conductor had touched me, was a mark, a small, perfect circle that glowed faintly with that same eerie blue light before fading away to nothing. As the submersible drew closer to the station, I heard it again, distant but distinct, the sound of metal wheels on phantom tracks, echoing through the depths of the ocean. The black tide was rising, and I was powerless to stop it. Is it possible to be trapped in a loop of nightmares? To experience the same horrors again and again, each time more real than the last, until the boundary between dream and reality dissolves completely? I stood in the submersible's tiny bathroom, staring at my reflection, searching for any trace of that glowing blue mark. Nothing remained, just my haggard face, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, 3 days' worth of stubble on my jaw. Yet I could still feel a phantom pain where the conductor's finger had touched me. The intercom crackled. Commander, we're initiating final docking procedures. Dr. Morrison has already established communication with the station. I gripped the small sink, knuckles turning white. Mason, have you noticed anything unusual about the station? Anything at all? A pause. Sir? The dark sections. B and D modules. They shouldn't be dark during docking operations. Another pause, longer this time. When Mason spoke again, confusion tinged his voice. All external lights are functioning normally, Commander. No dark sections reported. I pushed past the cramped doorway back to the main viewport. Station Theta loomed larger now, and sure enough, every section blazed with light, a beacon of human technology in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. No dark sections. No eerie similarities to my nightmares. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by concern of a different kind. Was I losing my mind? Combat stress finally catching up with me? Or something worse, some kind of neurological condition, perhaps, causing vivid hallucinations? The docking sequence proceeded without incident, no mysterious scraping sounds, no sense of dread. Just the normal mechanical processes of a submersible connecting with its destination. Docking complete, Mason announced. Pressure equalizing. You can disembark in 2 minutes. I gathered my duffel bag, checking once more for my satellite phone. It was there, fully charged, functioning normally. No railway ticket in sight. My fingers brushed against the combat knife strapped to my ankle, its presence reassuring. The airlock cycled open to reveal Dr. Abigail Morrison waiting in the reception corridor, a woman in her late 40s, silver streaking her dark hair, expression professionally neutral behind rimless glasses. "Commander Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Station Theta." I hesitated before shaking her hand, half expecting her skin to be cold and wet. Instead, it was warm, dry, human. "Doctor," I acknowledged, searching her face for any sign of the otherworldly presence from my dreams. I found none, just the tired eyes of a research station administrator with too many responsibilities. "I trust your journey was comfortable." She gestured for me to follow her down the corridor. "As comfortable as a 7,000-foot descent can be," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady, casual. Morrison led me through the reception area toward the central hub. Everything looked normal, bright, clean, properly maintained. Personnel passed us in the corridors, nodding respectfully, going about their duties without any hint of the terror or transformation from my nightmares. "I've scheduled an orientation briefing for 1400 hours, Morrison was saying as we entered the hub. "That will give you time to settle into your quarters and familiarize yourself with the immediate vicinity." The central hub bustled with activity, technicians monitoring systems, researchers discussing data displayed on the large central holographic projector. No phantom railway station, no eerie blue light, no conductor with his face of writhing darkness. Just an underwater research station doing its job. "Thank you," I said, realizing she was waiting for a response. "I appreciate the time to get oriented." Morrison nodded, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "Are you feeling well, Commander?" The pressure change can be disorienting for some. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired from the journey." She seemed to accept this, directing me toward the residential corridor. "Your quarters are in Section C, Room 12. Your security clearance has been programmed into this." She handed me a key card. "It will give you access to all areas except the specialized research labs in Section E, which require additional authorization." I took the key card, half expecting it to transform into a railway ticket in my hand. It didn't. The residential corridor looked exactly as it should, utilitarian, efficient, doors spaced at regular intervals along both sides. Nothing like the Victorian railway car from my nightmares. We stopped outside a door marked C12, Reynolds, E. "Get settled in," Morrison said. "The mess hall is back toward the hub, first corridor on the left if you're hungry. Otherwise, I'll see you at 1400 in my office, Section A, Room 1. She left me there, walking briskly back toward the hub, no sign of the transformed, water-dripping specter from my dreams. I swiped my key card, and the door slid open to reveal standard crew quarters, a small but efficient living space with a bunk, desk, storage locker, and private bathroom. Everything neat, functional, and utterly ordinary. I dropped my duffel bag on the bunk and sat down heavily beside it, running my hands over my face. The vivid nightmares had left me exhausted, my mind struggling to separate dream from reality. But here, now, everything was normal. No sign of the black tide, the conductor, or the railway to the dark below. Perhaps that's all they had been, nightmares, born from stress and anxiety about this new assignment. After all, deep-sea installations had always made me uneasy, even during my military service. The isolation, the pressure, the absolute darkness outside, it was enough to prey on anyone's mind. I unpacked methodically, the routine helping to ground me in reality. Clothes in the locker, toiletries in the bathroom, satellite phone and tablet on the desk. Normal actions in a normal environment. But as I placed the tablet on the desk, something caught my eye, a small puddle of water on the metal surface. I touched it cautiously. Not condensation, too much volume for that. And it was cold, ice cold. I looked up, checking the ceiling for leaks. Nothing. The walls were dry, the air circulation system functioning normally. Yet the puddle was there, undeniably real beneath my fingertips. A knock at the door startled me. I wiped my wet fingers on my pants and moved to answer it. A young woman stood in the corridor, early 30s perhaps, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard station uniform with a medical insignia. "Commander Reynolds?" she asked, offering her hand. "Dr. Laura Holt, Chief Medical Officer." I just wanted to introduce myself before the orientation briefing. I shook her hand, noting again with relief that it was warm, dry, normal. "Nice to meet you, Doctor." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are you settling in? Any issues with the pressure adjustment?" "None," I said, though I didn't sleep well on the journey down. Dr. Holt nodded sympathetically. "That's common. The human mind doesn't adapt easily to these depths. Many crew members report unusual dreams during their first few days here." I stiffened at the mention of dreams. "What kind of unusual dreams?" A flicker of something, concern? Fear crossed her face. "Various types. Often related to water, drowning, being trapped. It's the brain processing the environmental stress." She hesitated. "Have you experienced anything like that?" I considered telling her about my nightmares, the phantom train, the conductor, the transformation of the station into something ancient and malevolent. But what would be the point? She would likely attribute it to stress and suggest rest, perhaps offer sleeping medication. "Nothing worth mentioning," I lied. "Just standard stress dreams." Dr. Holt studied me for a moment, her professional gaze assessing. "Well, if that changes, please come see me. We monitor sleep patterns closely down here. Problems can escalate quickly in an isolated environment like this." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, eager to change the subject. "How long have you been stationed here?" 6 months on this rotation," she replied. "But I've worked deep-sea installations for nearly a decade." You learn to recognize the signs of pressure sickness, isolation stress, the particular brand of claustrophobia these environments can induce. "And have there been any such cases recently?" I asked casually. Her expression closed off slightly. "We maintain strict confidentiality regarding crew health issues, Commander." "Of course," I said quickly. "I only ask as it might affect security protocols." Dr. Holt seemed to consider this. "I can tell you that we've had some unusual incidents lately. Nothing directly threatening, but concerning enough that Dr. Morrison requested additional security personnel. Hence your presence." "What kind of incidents?" She glanced down the corridor, then lowered her voice. "Equipment malfunctions, communications disruptions, and some crew members reporting sensory anomalies." "Sensory anomalies?" "Hearing sounds that shouldn't exist at this depth. Seeing movement in peripheral vision. That sort of thing." She straightened, her professional demeanor returning. "All likely attributable to environmental factors and psychological stress." But she didn't sound convinced. "I should let you finish settling in," she said. "The mess hall serves continuously if you're hungry. And Commander," she hesitated again, "if you do experience anything unusual, anything at all, please report it immediately." for everyone's safety." With that cryptic warning, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the metal corridor. I closed the door and turned back to the desk, intending to check the puddle again. It was gone. The surface was completely dry, as if the water had never been there. I ran my fingers over the spot where it had been, finding no trace of moisture. Had I imagined it? Another hallucination? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I needed food, coffee, and to focus on the job at hand. Whatever was happening, whether real or imagined, I had a duty to protect this station and its personnel. The mess hall was half full when I arrived, various crew members seated in small groups around tables, talking quietly over their meals. The conversations hushed briefly as I entered, curious eyes assessing the new security chief before returning to their discussions. I collected a tray of what appeared to be pasta with some kind of sauce and a cup of strong black coffee, then found an empty table in the corner, positioning myself to observe the room. The crew seemed normal enough, tired from their work shifts, engaged in mundane conversations about research projects, equipment maintenance, messages from family on the surface. No one appeared to be transforming into a waterlogged specter. No one's eyes glowed with that eerie blue light. Just ordinary people doing extraordinary work in an extreme environment. As I ate, I studied the room's configuration, noting entry and exit points, security camera placements, potential vulnerabilities, standard security assessment, the routine helping to settle my mind. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to find a man standing beside my table, late 30s, muscular build, close-cropped dark hair with a touch of gray at the temples. He wore a maintenance uniform with Keller stitched on the pocket. "Please," I gestured to the empty chair across from me. He set down his tray and extended his hand. "Thomas Keller, Chief Engineer. People call me Tom." I shook his hand. "Eric Reynolds, Security Chief." "Yeah, I know," he said with a slight grin. "Everyone knows. New faces are rare down here, especially security types." He took a bite of his pasta, studying me as he chewed. "Military background, right? Let me guess. Navy SEAL?" I nodded, impressed. "That obvious?" "The way you entered the room, assessed everything, positioned yourself in the corner with your back to the wall." He shrugged. "Plus the haircut and the way you carry yourself. I was Army Rangers myself, 2 tours in Afghanistan before switching to civilian life." That explained his physique and observational skills. "How long have you been at Theta?" "Almost 2 years, Keller replied. "Longest continuous assignment they'll allow at this depth. I'm due for surface rotation in about a month." He lowered his voice. "Just between us, it can't come soon enough." "Problems?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Keller glanced around before answering. "This station's not right. Last few weeks especially." "How so?" He leaned forward. "Equipment failures that don't make sense. Systems going offline randomly, then coming back with no explanation. And the noises." My pulse quickened. "What noises?" "Like..." He frowned, searching for words. "Like metal wheels on tracks. Which is impossible, right? No trains down here." He forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Engineering team thinks it's just the station settling, metal expanding and contracting under pressure. But I've worked deep sea installations for 12 years, and I've never heard anything like it. Metal wheels on tracks. Just like in my nightmares." "When did these noises start?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the chill running down my spine. About 3 weeks ago, Keller said. Around the same time the dream started. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Dreams? He seemed to regret mentioning it, glancing around again before continuing in an even lower voice. Look, I'm not crazy, okay? I've been through combat. I've seen things that would break most people. But these dreams, he shook his head. They feel real. And everyone's having them. The same dreams. About what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A train, Keller whispered. A black train that comes from somewhere deep below. And a conductor with no face who asks for tickets to a destination none of us want to go. My blood ran cold. Not just my nightmare then. A shared experience among the crew. Anyone reported these dreams officially? I asked. Keller snorted. To who? The medical team says it's just stress responses to the environment. Management doesn't want to hear about anything that might disrupt the research schedule. And honestly, who wants to admit they're having nightmares like children? He was right. In a high-pressure environment like this, both literally and figuratively, admitting to psychological issues could damage careers, lead to immediate surface evacuation, and potentially the end of deep-sea assignments. Has anyone actually seen anything? I pressed. Besides in dreams? Keller hesitated. Rodriguez in water recycling swears he saw someone in an old-fashioned uniform standing at the end of a corridor last week. When he approached, the figure disappeared. And Chen in communications found puddles of seawater outside our quarters 3 nights in a row, seawater, not processed station water. Both reported it officially. Both were told it was likely hallucinations or condensation. Puddles. Like the one in my quarters that had vanished. What about Dr. Morrison? I asked. Has she experienced any of this? If she has, she hasn't shared it with the general crew, Keller replied. But she did request additional security personnel, which suggests she's concerned about something. Our conversation was interrupted by the station's intercom system. Attention all personnel. This is Dr. Morrison. We are experiencing minor fluctuations in power distribution. Non-essential systems may experience temporary outages. There is no cause for concern. Engineering teams are addressing the issue. As if on cue, the lights in the mess hall flickered briefly before stabilizing. Keller checked his watch and frowned. I'm not scheduled for any maintenance work right now. Whatever's happening, my team hasn't been briefed. He stood, gathering his tray. I should check in with engineering. Nice meeting you, Commander. And he lowered his voice again. If you hear those sounds or have those dreams, you're not imagining things. He left quickly, leaving me alone with a half-eaten meal and a mind full of troubling questions. The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the mess hall into darkness for several seconds before returning. In that moment of darkness, I could have sworn I heard it, distant but unmistakable, the rhythmic clickety-clack of metal wheels on phantom tracks. From across the room, I caught the eye of a young technician who was looking around wildly, her expression one of barely contained panic. She had heard it too. Not hallucination, then. Not just a nightmare. Something was happening on Station Theta, something that defied rational explanation. I checked my watch. Still an hour before the scheduled orientation briefing with Morrison. Time enough to do some preliminary investigation of my own. Leaving my tray at the disposal station, I exited the mess hall and made my way back toward the central hub. I needed to familiarize myself with the station layout anyway, might as well start now. The hub was less busy than before, with only a handful of technicians monitoring the various systems. The large holographic projector in the center still displayed a three-dimensional map of the surrounding seabed, rotating slowly to show various angles and elevations. I approached one of the workstations where a young man was inputting data. "Excuse me. Commander Reynolds, Security Chief. I'm trying to get oriented with the station layout." The technician, Patel according to his ID badge, looked up with a tired smile. "Of course, Commander. What specifically would you like to know? Can you show me the complete station schematic?" "All sections, all levels." Patel nodded, tapping commands into his console. The holographic display shifted, zooming out to show the entire station, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules arranged in a roughly radial pattern around the central hub. "We're here," Patel said, indicating the hub. "Residential quarters are in Section C, research labs in Sections D and E, life support and engineering in Section B, communications and administration in Section A." He pointed to each section as he named it. I studied the layout, committing it to memory. "What about these areas?" I asked, pointing to several smaller structures extending outward from the main complex. "Maintenance access nodes, mostly," Patel explained. "They connect to the exterior maintenance tunnels that run along the station's outer hull." "And this?" I indicated a section below the main level, connected by what appeared to be a vertical shaft. Patel hesitated. "That's Section F. The old core." "Old core?" "Station Theta wasn't built all at once," he explained. "It started as a much smaller research outpost nearly 15 years ago. When they expanded, they built around and above the original structure. Section F is what remains of that first outpost. It's mostly used for storage now, though some of the older equipment is still operational." I studied the old core carefully. "Any personnel stationed there?" "No, it's automated." Patel seemed uncomfortable with this line of questioning. "There's no need for regular human presence down there." "But it is accessible?" "With proper clearance, yes. There's a secure elevator in Section B that goes down to Section F." He glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "Though most crew members avoid it if possible." "Why is that?" Patel shrugged, trying to appear casual but not quite succeeding. "Just station folklore. People say it's unsettling down there. Probably just the age of the structure, the isolation. Or something else entirely." "One more question," I said. "Has the station experienced any unusual sounds recently? Specifically, anything that might sound like metal wheels on tracks?" Patel's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face paled, his hands froze over his console. "Who told you about that?" he whispered. "I've heard reports," I said vaguely. "Is it a common occurrence?" "It started 3 weeks ago," he said, voice barely audible. "After we began the deep core sampling project. At first, just a few people reported it. Now, almost everyone has heard it at least once." He looked around nervously. "Management says it's just the station settling, metal expanding and contracting under pressure. But you don't believe that." Patel met my eyes. "Commander, I have 2 doctorates in mechanical engineering. I know every sound this station should make. That sound, it doesn't belong here." Before I could press further, the lights throughout the hub flickered again, longer this time. The holographic display wavered, the image distorting briefly before resolving into the station schematic once more. But for a split second during the fluctuation, I could have sworn the display showed something else entirely, not the modern research station, but a vast, Victorian railway terminal, platforms stretching away into darkness, a massive steam locomotive waiting on the tracks. When the lights stabilized, the display was normal again. But Patel was staring at it, his face ashen. He had seen it too. "System glitch," he said automatically, but his voice shook. "Just a system glitch." Of course, I agreed, not wanting to push him further. "Thank you for your help. I should continue my orientation." I left him there, his fingers trembling slightly as they moved across his console. The central hub connected to each section of the station via spoke-like corridors. According to the schematic I'd just seen, the secure elevator to Section F, the old core, was located in Section B, which housed engineering and life support systems. I made my way towards Section B, nodding to crew members as I passed. Everyone seemed on edge, conversations hushed, eyes darting to the lights at any hint of flickering. The corridor leading to Section B was quieter, with fewer personnel moving about. A security checkpoint about halfway down required me to swipe my keycard before proceeding. Beyond the checkpoint, the character of the station subtly changed. The walls showed more signs of age, minor corrosion at the seams, older style lighting fixtures, ventilation grills of a different design. This section had clearly been part of an earlier construction phase. As I proceeded deeper into Section B, the corridor widened into a large control room filled with monitoring equipment for the station's various life support and power systems. Engineers and technicians moved between workstations, their expressions tense, conversations clipped and professional. I spotted Thomas Keller across the room, deep in conversation with an older man whose uniform indicated senior engineering status. Their body language suggested disagreement, with Keller gesturing emphatically while the older man shook his head. Not wanting to interfere with station operations, I continued past the control room, following signs for auxiliary systems access. The corridor narrowed again, the lighting dimmer here, the air noticeably cooler. Fewer personnel in this area, mostly maintenance workers moving purposefully between tasks. According to the station schematic, the secure elevator to Section F should be located near the end of this corridor. As I approached, the lights flickered once more, and this time remained dimmed, emergency lighting activating along the floor to mark the path. "Attention all personnel," Dr. Morrison's voice came over the intercom, tension evident despite her professional tone. "We are experiencing a more significant power fluctuation than anticipated. Please remain at your stations. Engineering teams are working to stabilize the systems." The dimmed lighting gave the corridor an ominous aspect, shadows deepening in the corners, the emergency floor lights creating pools of blue-white illumination at regular intervals. Blue-white, like the eerie light from my nightmares. I continued forward, increasingly certain that whatever was happening on Station Theta, the answer lay in the old core below. The secure elevator should be just ahead, around the next bend in the corridor. As I turned the corner, I stopped abruptly. The corridor ahead had changed. The modern metal walls and floor had given way to something older, more organic, rough-hewn stone that glistened with moisture, the ceiling lost in shadows above, the emergency lights transformed into antique gas lamps that cast a sickly blue glow. Not again. Not while I was awake. I blinked hard, expecting the hallucination to vanish, for the normal corridor to reappear. But the transformation remained, the stone passage stretching ahead into darkness. I reached out to touch the nearest wall. My fingers contacted cold, wet stone, as real and solid as anything I'd ever touched. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice echoing strangely in the transformed space. From somewhere ahead came the sound I had been dreading, the rhythmic clickety-clack of metal wheels on tracks, growing louder with each passing second. And with it, a voice like grinding metal, "All aboard. The black tide waits for no man." I turned to retreat, only to find the corridor behind me transformed as well, the way back now a stone passage identical to the one ahead, stretching away into shadow. Trapped. With the sound of phantom wheels growing ever louder, ever closer. I drew my combat knife, though I knew instinctively it would offer little protection against whatever was approaching. Still, the familiar weight in my hand was reassuring, a connection to the real world I knew. If this was real at all. The stone passage seemed to stretch and contract as I watched, the walls breathing like some vast, living organism. The gas lamps flickered, shadows dancing across the glistening surfaces. And then, at the far end of the passage, a figure appeared, tall, dressed in that same antique conductor's uniform, face obscured by shadow beneath the brim of his cap. The conductor from my nightmares, now manifest in what should have been the waking world. "Commander Reynolds," the figure called, its voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. "Your berth awaits. The black tide rises." I backed away, knife held before me. "Stay back. Whatever you are, stay back." The figure began to move toward me, not walking but gliding, as if pulled along by invisible tracks beneath its feet. As it drew closer, I could see that its uniform dripped with seawater, leaving a trail of dark puddles in its wake. "What do you want?" I demanded, continuing to back away, though I knew there was nowhere to go. "What?" The conductor tilted his head at that impossible angle. "We want passage. We want emergence. We want the world above. What are you?" My back hit stone as the passage behind me contracted, leaving me no further retreat. The conductor was close enough now that I could see beneath the shadow of its cap, not a face but a void, a swirling darkness shot through with threads of that eerie blue light. "We are the forgotten," it said. "The abandoned. The lost. Those who travel the dark below before your kind walk the earth." It reached toward me with a gloved hand. "And now, Commander, you will help us return." I slashed with my knife as the hand neared my face, the blade passing through the glove as if through smoke, meeting no resistance. The conductor made a sound like grinding metal, laughter, perhaps. "Physical weapons cannot harm us, Commander. We exist between realities, between dream and waking." Its hand continued forward, gloved fingers touching my temple. Searing pain shot through my head, dropping me to my knees on the stone floor. "The gateway is nearly open," the conductor said, its voice seeming to come from inside my skull now. "The threshold weakens with each passing hour." Through the pain, I saw visions, the station transforming, becoming a massive, organic structure that pulsed with that same blue light. The ocean floor around it cracking open, a vast darkness rising from the depths. And emerging from that darkness, a nightmare train, the black tide emblazoned on its side in glowing blue letters, pulling into a platform that shouldn't exist, disgorging passengers that were no longer human, their forms twisted, changed, amalgamations of flesh and shadow and writhing darkness. "Stop," I gasped, trying to fight the visions. "Whatever this is, stop it." "We cannot stop what has already begun," the conductor replied. "The sampling has reached our prison. The barrier thins. Soon, we will ride the black tide to the world above." The pain intensified, blackness creeping at the edges of my vision. With my last conscious thought, I lunged forward, driving my body through the conductor's form, expecting to meet resistance. Instead, I passed through cold emptiness, my momentum carrying me forward to crash onto a hard metal floor. Normal metal floor. Station floor. I blinked, disoriented. The stone passage was gone. I was lying on the floor of a standard station corridor, emergency lights pulsing along the baseboard. My knife lay beside me, having fallen from my grasp when I collapsed. A hallucination? Some kind of waking nightmare? But my clothes were wet, soaked through as if I had been submerged in seawater. And on the floor around me, puddles of water that couldn't have come from the station systems. Groaning, I pushed myself to my feet, retrieving my knife and returning it to its ankle sheath. The corridor looked normal now, standard station construction, no sign of rough-hewn stone or gas lamps. Ahead, at the end of the corridor, stood a set of heavy metal doors marked Section F access, authorized personnel only. The secure elevator to the old core. Whatever had just happened, hallucination, nightmare, or something far stranger, I was now certain that the answers lay below, in the original structure around which Station Theta had been built. My watch indicated I had 20 minutes before Morrison's orientation briefing. Not enough time to investigate Section F properly, but perhaps enough to get a preliminary look. I approached the secure elevator, heart still racing from the encounter with the conductor, real or imagined. A keycard scanner beside the doors required authorization to proceed. I swiped my security chief clearance card, expecting to be denied access. To my surprise, the scanner beeped affirmatively, and the heavy doors slid open to reveal an elevator cab that looked older than the rest of the station, utilitarian design, well-worn control panel, signs of long use. I stepped inside, finding only 2 destination buttons, B for the level I was currently on, and F for the old core below. My finger hovered over the F button. Once I pressed it, I would be descending into whatever lay below, alone, with no backup, no one even aware of where I was going. From somewhere in the distance came the sound once more, metal wheels on phantom tracks, echoing through the station structure. Decision made. I pressed the button. The doors closed with a solid thud, and the elevator began its descent into the dark below. How deep can you go before reality itself begins to unravel? Before the pressure crushes not just your body but your very perception of what's real? The elevator descended with a steady mechanical hum, the old mechanisms groaning occasionally under the strain. I checked my watch, 15 minutes until Morrison's orientation briefing. Not enough time for a thorough exploration, but perhaps enough to confirm my growing suspicions about Section F and its connection to my nightmares. My clothes were still damp from the encounter in the corridor, the fabric cold against my skin. Real or hallucination, the experience had left physical evidence. That alone was enough to push me forward. The descent seemed to take longer than it should for a single level. The indicator panel showed our progress. B. Between. F. The elevator slowed, then stopped with a shudder that vibrated through the floor. The doors remained closed for several seconds before reluctantly sliding open to reveal Section F, the old core of Station Theta. The contrast with the upper levels was immediate and striking. Where the main station was bright, modern, and efficiently designed, Section F looked like something from a previous era of deep-sea exploration, narrow corridors with lower ceilings, exposed pipes and conduits running along the walls, lining fixtures that cast shadows in a sickly yellowish glow. I stepped out cautiously, the elevator doors closing behind me with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. The air here was different, colder, with a faint organic smell underneath the metal and oil and recycled oxygen. Something like decay, but not quite. The corridor stretched in both directions, following the circular design of the original outpost. According to the station schematic I'd studied, Section F was much smaller than the expanded facility above, just a ring of corridors around a central research area, with various storage and maintenance rooms along the outer perimeter. I chose to go left, moving quietly despite the apparent emptiness of the level. My footsteps echoed on the metal floor, the sound seeming to travel farther than it should in the confined space. The corridor curved gradually, following the circular layout of the old core. Doors lined the inner wall at regular intervals, most marked with faded signs indicating storage functions, equipment, samples, archives. Along the outer wall, at less frequent intervals, were viewport windows, thick glass panels that looked out into the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. I paused at one, placing my hand against the cold surface. Nothing visible outside except the faint glow of the station's external lights reflecting off particles in the water. Beyond that, absolute blackness, the abyss into which the original outpost had been built. I continued along the corridor, passing more storage rooms, occasionally testing door handles. Most were locked, requiring security clearance I likely didn't possess for this level. The corridor curved further, bringing me to what appeared to be the main research area of the old core, a circular chamber with various workstations arranged around a central platform. Unlike the rest of Section F, this area showed signs of recent use, equipment powered up, screens displaying data feeds, coffee mugs on desks. I approached the nearest workstation, examining the displays. They showed seismic readings, temperature measurements, and what appeared to be sample analysis data. One screen displayed a three-dimensional rendering of the ocean floor beneath the station, with a deep borehole extending downward. The deep core sampling project Patel had mentioned. A flashing notification on another screen caught my attention. Anomaly detected, depth 12,347 feet, analysis pending. I tapped the screen, bringing up more detailed information. The anomaly had been detected 3 weeks ago, exactly when the strange noises and dreams had begun, according to crew reports. Further exploration of the files revealed daily notes from the research team. Day 1, sample extraction from anomaly level initiated. Material appears organic in nature but with unusual properties. Further analysis required. Day 4, sample continues to display inexplicable characteristics. Cellular structure unlike anything previously cataloged. Dr. Morrison has restricted access to Level 1 personnel only. Day 7, dreams reported among research team members. Possibly psychoactive properties released during analysis. Containment protocols upgraded. Day 14, increased frequency of station-wide reports of unusual sounds, visual phenomena. Correlation with sample activity spikes noted but inconclusive. Day 18, Dr. Morrison has ordered drilling to resume despite concerns. Corporate demands results. Day 21, something is coming through. That last entry, dated just 3 days ago, sent a chill through me. Something is coming through. The same words the conductor had used. The gateway is nearly open. The threshold weakens. The screen suddenly flickered, the text distorting before returning to normal. At the same time, the lights in the chamber dimmed momentarily, then stabilized. From somewhere below, not from within the station but beneath it, in the ocean floor itself, came a low, vibrating hum, more felt than heard. The floor trembled slightly beneath my feet. I checked the nearest viewport window. The external lights still illuminated only a small portion of the surrounding water, but something seemed different now. The darkness beyond the light's reach appeared more substantial somehow. Less like empty ocean and more like a physical presence pressing against the glass. Movement caught my eye, a flicker at the very edge of the illuminated area. Something dark moved through the water, too large and too fast to be any known deep-sea creature. It disappeared back into the blackness before I could focus on it properly. The humming intensified, and with it came the now familiar sound of metal wheels on phantom tracks, louder here than anywhere else in the station, reverberating through the structure in rhythmic pulses. I moved to the central platform, which housed what appeared to be the main control terminal for the deep core sampling operation. The screen displayed a real-time feed from cameras mounted on the drilling apparatus far below the station. The footage showed a massive drill bit extended into the ocean floor, surrounded by disturbed sediment. But it was what lay beyond the drill that seized my attention, a fissure in the bedrock, widening with each vibration, emitting that same eerie blue light from my nightmares. And moving within that light, shapes, indistinct, fluid, unlike any life form known to science. They seemed to pulse and shift, expanding toward the camera with each throb of blue luminescence. The fissure was growing, the drill having weakened the already thin barrier between whatever lay below and the ocean above. The sampling team hadn't just found something, they had released it, or were in the process of releasing it. The black tide, rising from the dark below. I needed to report this, to warn Morrison, to demand an immediate cessation of drilling operations. I turned away from the screen, intending to return to the elevator, when a noise from across the chamber froze me in place. A door on the far side, one I hadn't noticed before, marked direct access, authorized personnel only, was slowly opening, pushed from the other side. I ducked behind a workstation, drawing my knife, though I knew it would likely be useless against whatever had pursued me from the corridor above. Through the partially open door stepped Dr. Morrison, but not as I had met her earlier. This version of Morrison moved with an unnatural fluidity, her skin bearing that same grayish pallor from my nightmares, her clothes dripping seawater that pooled around her feet. Behind her came several more figures, station personnel similarly transformed, their eyes reflecting the eerie blue light as they moved into the chamber. They weren't looking for me, I realized. They were focused on the central terminal, gathering around it with an intensity that suggested purpose rather than random movement. Morrison placed her hand on the main control panel, fingers moving across the interface with practiced precision. On the screen, the camera view shifted, zooming in on the fissure in the ocean floor. The blue light intensified, the shapes within it becoming more distinct, writhing masses of darkness shot through with luminescent threads, pressing against the weakening barrier between worlds. "The threshold is ready," Morrison said, her voice carrying that same metallic quality as the conductor's. "The gateway opens." The other transformed crew members responded in unison, their voices a discordant chorus. The black tide rises. Morrison entered a series of commands into the terminal. On the screen, the drill bit began to retract, pulling away from the fissure it had created. But the damage was done. The fissure continued to widen on its own, blue light pouring through in pulsing waves. I needed to stop this, whatever it was. But how? What could one man do against an entity capable of transforming people, of warping reality itself? The humming grew louder, the station trembling more violently. The viewport windows creaked under increasing pressure, not from the ocean outside but from something else, something pushing against the very fabric of reality. Morrison turned suddenly, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. For a moment, I thought she had spotted me, but her eyes moved past my hiding place to focus on the main corridor. "He is here," she announced. "The conduit has arrived." The conduit. The conductor had called me that during our encounter in the transformed corridor above. Whatever was happening, I was somehow connected to it. With sudden clarity, I realized what I needed to do. Not hide, not run, but confront this directly. I stood from my hiding place, knife in hand, though I knew it would be useless. "Stop this," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you're bringing through, it ends now." Morrison turned, a smile spreading across her face that was nothing like the professional scientist I'd met earlier. "Commander Reynolds," she said, her voice still carrying that metallic quality. Just in time to witness the culmination of our work. "This isn't your work," I replied, stepping closer. "You're not Morrison anymore, are you?" "We are improving upon what we found," the thing wearing Morrison's face responded. "Your kind sent machines to pierce the veil, to extract what should remain buried. Now we use those same tools to free ourselves." Behind her, the screen showed the fissure widening further, the blue light now pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. "How do I stop it?" I demanded. Morrison laughed, the sound like grinding metal. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The black tide rises. We will reclaim the world that was once ours." I looked around desperately for anything that might help, and spotted the emergency containment protocols posted beside the main terminal. Among them, "In case of catastrophic containment failure, initiate core sealing procedure." In one fluid motion, I lunged forward, pushing past the transformed crew members who reacted too slowly to stop me. I reached the terminal, fingers flying across the interface to the emergency systems. "Core sealing procedure requires authorization," the system prompted. I swiped my security clearance card, hoping against hope that it would work. "Authorization accepted. Warning, core sealing will result in isolation of Section F. Confirm?" "No!" Morrison screamed, her voice no longer human at all. She lunged toward me, hands transformed into something like claws, blue light streaming from her eyes. I slammed my fist on the confirmation button. Alarms blared throughout the chamber. Heavy blast doors began to descend around the perimeter, sealing off Section F from the rest of the station. "Core sealing initiated. Explosive bolts will detach Section F in 60 seconds. The transformed crew members moved toward me with inhuman speed, but the station's violent shaking threw them off balance. The blue light was everywhere now, pouring through cracks appearing in the floor and walls. "You cannot escape," Morrison hissed. "The black tide claims all." I scrambled toward the elevator, the only potential escape route. Behind me, the fissure on the screen had become a gaping wound in reality, the shapes within it now clearly visible, twisted, ancient things that had never known the light of the sun. 30 seconds TO detachment, the system announced. I reached the elevator, punching the call button repeatedly. The doors refused to open, part of the containment protocol, sealing all exits. Trapped. I was trapped in Section F with the horrors breaking through from below. "Commander Reynolds," came a voice behind me, not Morrison's, but the conductor's. I turned to find him standing there, uniform pristine, face still obscured by shadow beneath his cap. "Your ticket," he said, extending a gloved hand holding a small slip of paper. "Final boarding call." "Go to hell," I gasped. "Oh no, Commander," the conductor replied, something like amusement in his metallic voice. "We're bringing hell to you." 10 seconds to detachment. The floor beneath my feet buckled, the station structure groaning under impossible stresses. The viewport windows shattered inward, but instead of crushing water, blue light poured through. In that moment of chaos, the elevator doors suddenly opened. Without hesitation, I threw myself inside, punching the button for Section B. The doors began to close, agonizingly slowly. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the conductor watching me, still holding out that phantom ticket. 5, 4, 3. The doors sealed shut. The elevator began to rise. 2, 1. A massive concussion shook the elevator shaft. I was thrown against the wall as the explosive bolts fired, detaching Section F from the rest of Station Theta. The elevator cables snapped, sending the cab plummeting a short distance before emergency brakes engaged with bone-jarring force. Darkness. Silence except for the ringing in my ears. Then, emergency lights flickered on in the elevator cab. The intercom crackled. "This is Station Control. We've experienced a catastrophic failure in Section F. All personnel, report to emergency stations immediately." I leaned against the elevator wall, gasping for breath, unsure if I had stopped something terrible or merely delayed it. The elevator doors opened onto Section B, now illuminated by red emergency lighting. Station personnel rushed past in organized chaos, following emergency protocols. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in a darkened control panel, my own face, but with a faint blue glow in my eyes that hadn't been there before. The black tide rises. And part of it, I feared, had risen with me. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.